Now, on Thursday, the President will officially unveil our country's economic recovery plan. He's due to do that Thursday afternoon in Parliament. Last week, a draft plan was released after the Cabinet Lekgotla, which was rather light on time frames and budgets for the plan to boost employment and growth. We are, quite frankly, awash with plans on how to revive the economy. Let's discuss this now with Dr. Kenneth Creamer, Senior Lecturer at the Wits School of Economic and Business Sciences. Good evening, Kenneth. Do we actually need another plan or any plan?
Hi, Sally. Yes, it's quite right. The President will be announcing a recovery plan on Thursday, and quite a lot of work has been undertaken by the President with the social partners in NEDLAC, business, labour, community, as well as the economic ministers and consultations with economic experts. And I would say, yes, we definitely do need an economic recovery. Whether we need a plan, Sally, that will depend on whether that plan is effective. I don't think we should be expecting a perfect plan or a silver bullet. But what we do need is we need some interventions that will be capable of turning around our economy. The impact of COVID has seen about 2 million people plus having lost their jobs in an L-shaped fashion, not having recovered. Hunger is on the rise. And we were already in a recession before the COVID. So it is urgently required that some action is taken. And I think the President is moving us along. It might not be perfection, but the perfection should not be the enemy of the good. And we need a plan, a turnaround plan for our economy.
So, you know, we all seem to agree that, what the problems are. We've all correctly diagnosed the problem, but there are some real sticking points. And it was quite marked for me last week as the President was announcing the draft plan, or as he was releasing the draft plan. We had protests, a COSATU protest. In fact, it was multiple union organizations protesting. So for all the stakeholders buying in at NEDLAC, when the rubber hits the road on the streets, it seems that actually everyone just retreats to their corners. Do you think that we will really get agreement on the big issues? The big issues, for example, you know, the wage deal. Government wants to pull out of the third year of the wage deal with the public servants. The public servants are saying that's absolutely not going to happen. I mean, how do we resolve something like that?
Well, Sally, I think we need to focus on doing a few things, not too many things, and we need to do them very well. We need to make sure we follow through and we implement. The recovery plan, I think, needs to be digital, it needs to be green, and it needs to be inclusive, in the sense that there's inclusive growth. So what needs to happen now is to focus on those kind of interventions. There will be ongoing labor issues, there will be ongoing business issues, there will be ongoing debates amongst economists. But we need to see action where we're going to remove the real obstacles on the supply side of this economy. We cannot even think of recovery while we have a shortage of electricity. Already this year, we've had more load shedding than in any other year, and half the time we've been under lockdown. Our electricity shortage is the primary #1 constraint, and we need to move towards a green transition. We can create tens of thousands of jobs if we start building solar and wind farms and replacing our aging coal fleet. In fact, I see load shedding therein lies an opportunity for South Africa. So we need to focus on things like that, the real binding constraints. If we can get 5G rolled out and we can ensure that businesses in the townships, the villages and the big firms are able to access reliable, speedy internet, that will help us to compete in the global economy. So I think, yes, there will be disputes, and I'd like to come back to some of the things you were talking about, because I think when we were discussing some of these issues, when we spoke about, for example, the social compact, I don't think government has gone far enough in winning a social compact. You're quite right, there are contradictions where Labour is having a strike at the very time where we're discussing a recovery plan. I think that the government has developed a plan, but it needs to get some kind of buy-in in the form of wage agreements, of labour peace, and business must commit to black economic empowerment, transformation, investment and job creation. That's real social compacting.
So just on the electricity thing, we have seen some movement because there's been so many complaints that the unbundling of Eskom is taking too long, that the IRP plan is not happening quickly enough. Just a few weeks ago, Gwede Mantashe, I think, gazetted issues to try and just decrease the red tape around that. But do you think it's moving quickly enough, Kenneth? Do you think that that is an area that is simply, that needs incredible heat? And why have we still got a mention of a nuclear build in the draft plan?
Yes, I think that the government needs to implement a few things very well. And there are signs that the rolling out of the next bid window for renewable energy is well underway. I do think they mustn't make the mistake of trying to balance all the different interests around electricity. We need to go for the lowest cost, green, most efficient option. The South African economy was built around the burning of low-cost coal. And that gave our industry competitive advantage, gave our mining industry cheap energy inputs, gave our factories cheap energy inputs. And we've lost that completely. We've lost our global competitiveness with regard to our low-cost energy input. Our mineral energy complex is no longer an engine of growth. So we need to go for a low-cost, reliable energy solution. And it isn't right to try and balance to say, well, is the nuclear crowd happy and is the gas crowd happy? We need to have a scientific and economic rationale. And I do believe that there is movement, as you say. The Minister, Gwede Mantashe, the President in the State of the Nation, have said very clearly that we are going to see a massive rollout of renewable energy. It's 8 to 11,000 megawatts of electricity will be rolled out in the next few years. And in fact, the research that I've seen indicates that we're underestimating how much we need to build. The IRP is based on an assumption that Eskom will be performing at a particular level, and Eskom is performing below that level. So we need to build even more than is being stated by the President and by the Minister in their planning. But there's definitely decisive movement in that direction.
It was interesting to see the launch of the Mooikloof megacity southeast of Pretoria last week. And a lot of that does involve, I think, green building practice. And it also is inclusive. It's trying to get to the people, give them housing options closer to the city, people who cannot afford a bond but don't qualify for the so-called RDP housing. Is that the sort of project, which does involve the private sector, that we should have many more of? We know that the head of investment and infrastructure is pushing ahead with that. Is that exactly the sort of thing our economy needs?
Yes, it needs to happen in housing and infrastructure. So when we talk about infrastructure, there's two components. The one is the economic infrastructure and the one is the social infrastructure. So when we talk about economic infrastructure, transport and electrification, water and digitization and such, that kind of infrastructure can pay for itself. It's off budget and is not going to be held back necessarily by the limits that our fiscus is facing, because the private sector, if the regulatory framework allows it and licensing and projects are allowed to be undertaken in the form of public-private partnerships and investment, they'll pay for themselves as households pay for their electricity, as firms pay for their electricity and other services. So that kind of movement is very positive, because as you know, our fiscus is very tight. We are moving our national debt from 80% plus over the years ahead, and we have to contain expenditure. So much of the economic infrastructure, we need to find ways where it can be off budget. Then when you come to the social infrastructure, education, healthcare, housing in many cases in low-cost areas, space needs to be created for that on the budget. And that's why the strike that you're talking about earlier, there needs to be a containment of wages, a containment obviously of corruption and wastage, so that this growth can be inclusive. I said it should be green and digital and inclusive. And it will only be inclusive if the state is able to ensure that the poorer members of our community are able to get access to the services and the education and the health to bring them into the mainstream of the economy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your insights this evening. Dr. Kenneth Creamer, Senior Lecturer at the Wits School of Economic and Business Sciences.